Okay, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Tyrone Squires. I am managing director and founder of Transparent RX, America's oldest fiduciary model, PBM, also founder of the Pharmacy Benefit Institute of America. Just a little bit about me before we dive into the topic for today. And by the way, this is a new webinar for 2025. We've updated it from the previous years. So you might want to get your popcorn ready, whatever it is, your Diet Pepsi, your coffee, your tea, and just buckle up for this. A little bit about me. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry now for 2 decades. I started out with Eli Lilly as a pharmaceutical sales rep, went into the corporate offices for about a year, led a market access team, and we were charged with negotiating with PBMs to get our, at that time, I worked in the diabetes care division, and we were charged with getting our branded products onto the PBM's formulary. Always wanted to throw my hat in to become an entrepreneur. So I left Eli Lilly, loved healthcare and the idea of being able to make a little bit of money while helping people. So I started a mail order pharmacy, ran that for about 5 years, exited it with a little bit of money, but more importantly, with more knowledge. After having contracting directly with PBMs and receiving these take it or leave it deals that are often provided to independent pharmacies, and then also negotiating with drug wholesalers and locking you into these master purchasing agreements, and then ratcheting up the price over time because you have to buy a certain amount of product from them. And so from that experience, I just got frustrated. I was in Amarillo, Texas yesterday doing a presentation, and without knowing my background, the topic came up, who has the energy, to fight this? Well, I do. And because of my experience. And so I hope that you do too. And that's part of the reason why you're here, because we all know that change needs to happen. Patients and buyers of PBM services need to have a bigger role or say so in how PBMs generate their revenue and how they help people get better. So before we get started, though, before I dive in, I'm going to ask you to do one thing. Now, you may have seen this before, and if you haven't, if you're a broker, if you're a consultant, if you're a CFO, if you're a director of benefits, maybe you just want to break into the industry. Maybe you just want to get a promotion. You're already in the industry. This playbook is a must-have in your toolkit. It is, without a doubt, one of the top 2 or 3 reports or white papers, whatever you want to call it, that I've read with a focus on helping employers ever. And what I want to ask you to do is, before I dive in, because I don't want you to just hear it from me, I want you to hear it from others. And so this is a part of the materials you can download as part of this webinar. You should see that option on your control panel. But you can go out on the web and get that article, this report as well. And so what I want to do is I want you to take just a minute or two. Now I'm going to go silent and let you do this, to read the flaws in the current PBM selection process. This is not just about the selection process. This is also about the monitoring process. The ongoing evaluation of a PBM who already might have been put in place for you or your clients. And so read this, because without this, what I'm going to talk about today will make less sense to you. So take a minute, maybe 2 minutes, just to digest this information here. And I got my little timer here. Make sure I got my timer going. I don't want to go over. Okay, just about 10 more seconds. Okay. Okay. So now that you've read that, here's the agenda for today. And you'll be able to, and listen, I swear I had no input into that report, but I swear they've been following me for the last 5 or 6 years to write this report. Uh, and so you'll see a direct link with what I'm going to share with you today back to this report. Now, it's important, just some real quick PBM 101 here. It's important to understand the PBM business model before we go any further. And let me start with the contractual relationship. Pharmacy benefit managers, we contract with pharmacies in order to have sites from which product, prescription drugs can be dispensed to our plan participants. Those plan participants are provided by our clients. Those clients for us are third-party payers, employers, unions, governments, whether it's city, state, federal, school districts, coalitions, and also health plans as well. Those are our clients. Now, they hire us because we have a large nationwide network of pharmacies in which we've contracted, again, to have prescription drugs dispensed to our plan participants. Now, when those pharmacies dispense a prescription medication, we reimburse them. We pay them based upon the contract we've entered into with them. And listen, there's 60,000 pharmacies, 65,000 pharmacies. Really from a PBM perspective, there's not a lot involved with contracting with that many pharmacies. Once you nail down CVS and the Walgreens of the world, and then you go after the supermarket, the large supermarket chains, and then the independent pharmacies, you can contract with all of them basically through one or two PSAOs, Pharmacy Services Administrative Organizations, which are essentially, act as, let's keep it simple, act as kind of a sort of a buying group for independent pharmacies. So once you get maybe 15 or 20 contracts, listen, you're at 45, 50,000 pharmacies in your network already. Now, when that prescription is dispensed, and by the way, unless the PBM owns a pharmacy, i.e. a mail order or specialty pharmacy, we never take control of the product. My PBM doesn't own any pharmacies, doesn't have any ownership in any pharmacies. It's a conflict of interest any way you slice it. Whether the PBM is acting badly or not, it is still a conflict of interest to act as both the buyer and the seller, which is essentially what they're doing when they own pharmacies. And so prescription is reimbursed to the pharmacy, and then we bill our clients for that same prescription. This is where the problems begin. They actually begin in the contracting part of this system. But there's three big problems from a buyer perspective, a buyer of PBM services perspective. The first one is the reimbursement to the PBM for the drugs that the pharmacy dispense is too high. That's referred to as the spread, the network pricing spread. The third-party payer is paying more than the PBM is paying. In other words, the PBM is reimbursing a payment to the pharmacy. That's the first problem. The second problem is the inflow of cash to the third-party payer from the PBM in the form of rebates is too low. It's too low. And we're going to talk about that here, and we're going to go into detail about rebate, GPOs, and the whole nine. But here's the most important problem from this diagram. And that is, when you look at this diagram, look who sits atop this diagram. You do. Your clients do. Yet, you know the least about how this entire system works. And the PBMs have leveraged that lack of sophistication to their financial advantage. Instead of educating their clients, instead of taking on a fiduciary standard of care, they have decided, you know what, we know way more about this than you, and we're going to do our best to engage in asymmetric information. In other words, we're going to try and prevent you from getting the information you need to make better decisions, instead of acting as a fiduciary for their clients. Now, that's the distribution and reimbursement system. Here are the services that PBMs offer, and they're consistent among all PBMs. But what is different is how PBMs execute on these services. What is the priority? Not based upon what the PBM says, but what it does. And so for every PBM, this is the priority in how it should stack up. Number one, safety. That's the number one priority, safety. Number two is outcomes. Number three is cost containment. After number one and two have been addressed, how can we achieve safety and improved healthcare outcomes at the lowest possible cost? You notice I didn't say anything about noise in those first three, or someone calling in because they're unhappy their drug isn't on the formulary. In prudent PBM practices, that does not take precedence over safety and outcomes. Then you got cost containment, and then number four is participant satisfaction. That is how a good PBM operates, in that order. Now, there are four primary cost drivers, and I'm going to touch on all four of them here for the remainder of the webinar and tie it back to that report we read together. Price, discounts off of AWP, rebates which are designed to get the lowest net cost. That's what we're talking about with price. Utilization, what are the days supplies being used? How many utilizers are there? What channels are being used for the dispensation of prescription drugs? Product mix, what % of drugs are generic compared to brand? What percent of drugs are specialty compared to non-specialty or small molecule brand drugs? Here's the status quo today. PBMs enter into contracts with their clients and offer up an artificially low PBM administrative fee. Sometimes it's zero administrative fee. Sometimes the PBM will say, give us all your rebates and we'll lower the medical administrative fee. The point is that when that administrative fee, because it is really the only transparent fee that a PBM can earn. And so I talked about asymmetric information when PBMs are trying to hide information from their clients so they can't make the best business decisions. And so when that happens, and the PBM is able to charge $0 administrative fee, $2.50 per member per month, unknowingly the PBM client has essentially provided that PBM with a blank check and says, you fill it in however you see fit throughout the plan year. And these are the buckets in which those PBMs will do that. And they are allowed to do that based upon the contract language. The self-dealing, the opacity when it comes to PBMs, if that is how the PBM generates its revenue, if it is not willing to get off of its bad business model, starts with the contract language on page 1 with the definitions. No expert in pharmacy benefits management who's been an operator or has been close to an operator or had a role as an operator, whether it be a CFO or maybe a SVP of operations, will disagree with the fact that the contract definitions set the foundation for all the financials. And it starts on page 1 with the definitions. And those definitions you need to key on: AWP or NADAC. What is the source of it? And limit those to one source. Whatever the price benchmark is, NADAC, AWP, WAC, whatever it is, ASP, whatever it is, there should be one source that provides that information, and the PBM can't cherry pick it as they see fit. The price benchmark, brand drug, generic drug, specialty drug, and rebates. And so that lack of alignment with fiduciary obligations that plan sponsors have, and you can see what that looks. This is just 3 examples between the cost offsets. In other words, the PBM is allowed to underperform in one performance guarantee, and it'll overperform in another, and it can move that overperformance into a completely different category or a completely different channel. Each performance guarantee should stand on its own merits. Exclusion of single source generics. PBMs exclude single source generics from the generic discount guarantee. That inflates the generic discount guarantee by as much as 13%. Rebate spreads, the difference between what a PBM actually takes in and what it pays out to its clients. And so we have, between us and the drug manufacturers, what's called a rebate aggregator. And rebate aggregators have multiple clients and multiple types of clients. They can have PBMs, health systems, health plans, large employers, unions. These are the clients of rebate aggregators. The rebate aggregators contract directly with the drug manufacturers. All right, they contract directly with the drug manufacturer. Now, as a client of the rebate aggregator, we send every month to our rebate aggregator a claims file. Every client of the rebate aggregator sends a claims file to the rebate aggregator. The rebate aggregator will then consolidate those files and put it into an NCPDP file format, and then send that file to the drug manufacturer. The drug manufacturer will then now reconcile that claims data. And by the way, we have a data feed connection with our rebate aggregator, and the information that the drug manufacturers request, if you put it in, say, an Excel file, it goes all the way to something crazy like row BZ or something crazy on the information that they ask before they pay the rebates. And so they take in this NCPDP file format from the rebate aggregator, reconcile it against the contract. Once that is done, the drug manufacturer will then send the money owed based upon the contract to the rebate aggregator. The rebate aggregator will then pay out to its clients what they are owed based upon their contract with the rebate aggregator. And so let me just say this. In terms of, we talked about contract between the PBM and the purchaser of PBM services and how important it is. The same is true for PBMs. There are PBMs that are 100 times the size as us who have poor rebates, then receive poorer rebates or lower rebates than we do, because they lack the sophistication to get transparency into their contract. Heck, they didn't even negotiate getting claim level data or explanation of payments for the rebate dollars they receive. This is PBMs. This is PBMs. And so I talked about rebate spreads. And so there's more than just one type of rebate. There are multiple names for rebates. And so this is how it works. I was in that room. The drug manufacturer will say, we've got $10 million in refunds or rebates we're going to pay for this drug. And then, often led by the PBM will say, okay, let's put X percent in access rebates. Let's put X percent in administrative fees. And by the way, these administrative fees are different than the administrative fees you pay or your clients might pay for an account manager, a call center, access to the claims adjudication platform, right? That's different than this. This is strictly between the drug maker and the rebate aggregator. Now, we know that rebates can be relabeled, but how is it that the PBM can legally keep revenue or money that I'm entitled to? After all, we hired you to work on our behalf. These are our employees and their dependents. Why are you keeping 50% of the rebates? Well, the reason is the definitions. When you look at a definition like this, it looks innocent enough, right? It looks innocent enough until you have a trained eye and you see where it says rebates that the administrator receives, the PBM receives. This is public information. And so in this scenario, Broward County sued because it conducted an audit and uncovered that Coalition for Advanced Pharmacy Services had retained rebates that should have gone to Broward County. Coalition for Advanced Pharmacy Services happens to be a subsidiary of Optum. And so technically, the Optum didn't receive the rebates. Its subsidiary received the rebates. Broward contracted with Optum, not CAPS. Well, Broward has enough muscle and influence that if they uncover it and they ask for the money back, they are going to get the revenue back. And so I talked about the energy up front, and what it takes to keep pushing forward to make things better. And it's this type of thing that gives me the energy. So within the last, maybe it started 5 years ago, but within the last year, maybe 2 years, and I didn't learn about this until maybe a year and a half ago, that everyone now who's receiving rebates is going through the big 3 PBMs to get them. Now, listen, I'm a competitor. I want to compete against the best. And this gives me something to keep getting out of bed for. Imagine the flex that this is. That the big PBMs, because what they realized were you were getting smarter and it was going to be tougher for them to retain the rebates the old way, right? The old way, right? Through the rebate spreads and the renaming of rebates. So what they've done now is created group purchasing organizations, moved them overseas. You can figure out why yourself. And now they're charging drug manufacturers what's called GMS or GPO management fees, right? And so now the fees that they charge drug makers, those fees reduce the available pool of rebate dollars that are being paid out. As important, they're not transparent. They're not being disclosed. And if they are being disclosed, it's tough to get the information to verify what's being disclosed. Now, based on that previous slide, if you're a buyer of PBM services, you're a consultant, you're recommend, you're managing RFPs, you want that whoever's paying the PBM rebates, you want them to be positioned here as close to the GPO as possible. But nothing has changed in the sense that the contract is most important. So in other words, you could have a PBM here, right? And they're farther down from the GPO where the money flow, where the money starts. But if their contract is more transparent than the contract of an entity here, they could very well receive better rebates than the entity that's closer to the GPO. So the contract, again, is very, very important. So understand where they sit in that diagram. And so ultimately, in terms of rebate spread, what is happening, and we're still on price here. Remember the 4 cost drivers. Price is the first one. And when we're talking about price, the components are, what's the price benchmark? AWP minus, NADAC plus. What's the price benchmark? Also, the rebates, right? They're a component of price as well to get you to lowest net cost. I don't know, how much rebates really mean if you don't get claim level detail on the drugs that were eligible for a rebate and what was paid on them. And so the PBM, the drug manufacturers, they agree, okay, this is where the money's going to go. The PBMs who engage in opacity, who offer artificially low administrative fees, who push back on fiduciary standards of care, what they are attempting to do, and it starts with the contract, is maintain these for themselves and only pay back this. Worse yet, sometimes the purchaser doesn't even receive 100% of the formulary rebates, despite what they may see in the contract, if you don't have a trained eye to understand the language. Sometimes they might only receive 50% of the rebates. The contract language is that poor. And this is and I'm saying this sarcastically, this is the beauty of how the revenue flows, the money flows in the reimbursement and distribution system, in the U.S. pharmaceutical reimbursement and distribution system, is that when a PBM's client overpays here and is underpaid here, it's hidden in the plan's final cost. Everyone talks about how PBMs are adding costs to the supply chain, how they're adding costs to the system, but they don't really understand how or why. Because that overcharge here and that undercharge here is revenue to the PBM. It is revenue to the PBM. It doesn't disappear. And so in terms of pricing, there's two options for a plan sponsor with a fiduciary responsibility. Either the PBM takes on a fiduciary role, or it offers up radical transparency. A fiduciary PBM is going to charge a higher administrative fee than what you're probably accustomed to. The base is probably going to start somewhere around $8.95 PMPM, however you factor it out, was PPM, PMPM per paid claim. And then it's going to go up from there based upon optional services that are being provided. You might think that's high, but what I'm telling you is, and I know this to be factual, is that some PBMs are charging as much as $50 per member per month to be the PBM. Some PBMs are charging more than it should cost to pay for the drugs. Their fee is higher than it would cost to dispense the drugs if you eliminate the overpayments to them. So we got price, all right? What I want you to remember about price, it starts and ends with the contract. Now, in that report on page 7 that I asked you to read, what you will find in that report is they talk about the lack of focus on, I think they use drug mix, we use product mix, same thing. The lack of focus and the evaluation of a PBM's performance on product mix and utilization. Contracting, understand the contract, understand the pricing benchmarks, the rebates. Education, you got to have someone on your side who knows what they're doing. And I'm not talking about people who talk loud and bang their fist on the table and just kind of pick up PBM as they go over the past 10 or 20 years. No, I'm talking about someone who's been on the inside or someone who's been trained by someone who's been on the inside. Reporting, what are you paying for today? Clinical, how do I get the best clinical outcomes? I'm going to show you, and listen, this is not a sales pitch, all right? I'm sharing with you KPIs internally that you can use to benchmark against your incumbent PBM or PBMs you may be evaluating in an RFP selection process. And those numbers we're going to share, you can't get there through a PA process that is essentially rubber stamped. And you have pharmacists whose decision criteria differ. It has to be consistent. It has to be systematic in how those decisions are made. And listen, the emotion has to be taken out of it. We've taken much of that out of the hands of our pharmacists. Let me show you what I mean. If and by the way, remember I told you I was a drug sales rep. I took over territory that was ranked like 600 out of 612 territories. Within 18 months, went from 600 to number 11 or something like that. You know how I did it? Took the docs out for a drink. I just, hung out with them, made jokes, cracked jokes, brought in lunches. They liked me. I would go in and say, hey, I've got this brand drug. I know it's expensive. I know metformin compared to my branded Actos. I know my Actos is 20 times higher because you prescribe it first line anyway. Metformin will work. I get it, doc. But I need you to prescribe this Actos first, even though it's 20 times more expensive. And they would do it. Today, that is done from TV ads. It is done from social media. It is done from ads in social media where you can click a button and be taken to a telehealth consultation. It is done by influencers. Oh, I saw this commercial, Doc. It treats the disease that you already have prescribed the drug for me. And I know it works fine in this generic, but hey, can you prescribe? I want to try this one. And so for us, if a brand drug is presented and it is not on our formulary, it's an automatic denial. With that denial comes a letter recommending therapeutic alternatives, usually more times than not, lower cost therapeutic alternatives that are on our formulary. Remember what I said up front. And whenever I say this, people get, they start moving in their chair and making these faces. Do you want to optimize the pharmacy benefit or not? From a clinical perspective, what are the results that you want to achieve? Because without this, a pharmacist receives the PA and they go through the process. There's no contraindications. It's going to be safe for the patient. Yeah, I'll approve this. And then now you have PA approval rates 70, 80%. Now, and we're talking about utilization and product mix still. Hang in there with me. This is high level stuff that can help, even if you just take bits and pieces of it. So we've got the electronic prior authorization review at number one. A part of that prior authorization review, every one of our pharmacists goes through the FDA. There's been industries created because PBMs don't do this. I won't throw out the names, but there are companies that do this. They've created a cottage industry, a bolt-on service doing what the PBM should be doing in the first place. But they don't do it. Why? Because they profit from poor utilization. They profit from poor product mix. When they own the specialty pharmacies, when they own the mail order pharmacies. So through the prior authorization process, our pharmacists have to check off an initial and acknowledge having gone through, and we've got some digital tools that help in that process that we've built in-house as well. Now, here's the point I want to make about this solution stacking cost management process. The retail pharmacy is last for us. The retail specialty pharmacy is last for us. Remember, in that report, the playbook for employers, lack of focus on utilization, lack of focus on product mix, and I'm going to show you some charts here. They're going to knock your socks off. It's the last resort for us because we don't cannibalize ourselves by having the drug be dispensed through a different channel. We can manage those channels for the benefit of our clients. We don't need to steer patients through the most expensive channel. So you've got patient assistance programs here. You've got international procurement next here, and then you've got 340B here, and you've got coupon assistance programs with the PAP as well. So, and then before we still get to the retail specialty pharmacy, we've got home infusion as an option. So when evaluating PBMs, whether they're an existing PBM or one you may bring in, it goes way beyond just what the discount guarantees that are being offered or proposed and what the rebates are that are being offered or proposed. And those rebates and those discount guarantees are unreliable at best if you can't tie it back to the contract. And so from a clinical perspective, and by the way, I didn't even mention this. I didn't mention how important the formulary is. I didn't mention how important the formulary is, how important the drug utilization management programs are, right? So from a clinical perspective, what channels are being used? What drug utilization management tools are being used? And are they effective? How are we measuring their effectiveness? This is how. This is how. And so CMS uh, their generic dispense rate is 90%. It hovers at 88, 89, 90, right in there. But on average, 90%. That's the benchmark that we use. And so every PBM, if it chose to, could have high participant satisfaction. Imagine this. PBMs have low participant satisfaction and don't limit access. How does that happen? And so, uh, uh, and so 90%, I'm going to show you how important that number is here in a second. And by the way, the PA approval rate and the appeal approval rate is attainable with still having high participant satisfaction. We have members call in all the time that say, tell me what I need the doctor to say in the prior authorization request. I'll call them and tell them, and they'll put it in there. PA approval rates of 70, 80% are too high. They're being rubber stamped. The PBMs want those drugs, those high cost drugs, because that's what they are, high cost drugs, to be dispensed through their pharmacies. Again, utilization. Again, product mix. The Institute for so ICER, Institute for Clinical and Economic Research, they have this HBBP benchmark. And what it says is the price at which a drug becomes more harmful than it is good. And from a weight loss perspective, these products, in terms of their net price, exceed what ICER has recommended as the ideal price point. So in other words, at this cost, those products do more harm than they do good. It's the only independent body that does this type of research. Well, I shouldn't say the only. I would say it's the most reputable. Opioids, listen, PBMs are being sued. The outcomes we don't know because of the alleged role they played in the opioid epidemic. From a clinical standpoint and utilization, make sure you understand. And so what MME is, morphine milligram equivalent. So essentially you're converting uh, uh, opioids and benzodiazepines, their utilization into morphine equivalents. And then based upon these benchmarks here, you determine if there's more harm being done than good. And clinical pharmacists will do that. So you got to have a program in there like that. This is a new metric that we created. We've got generic dispensing rate, right? Or generic utilization rate. We've got now specialty dispensing rate. Again, product mix and utilization are clinical programs. Their results are based upon clinical programs, not price. Not price. And so here's what I want you to notice. It was just 3 or 4 years ago that utilization of specialty drugs was maybe 1%, 1.5%, 2% of the patient population. Now, it's not uncommon to see 5%. The drug makers and the PBMs want that. They want that number to increase. It's your job to manage the trend and not allow that to go unchecked. We want people to get the drugs that they need to get better, but you want to do that at the lowest possible cost. If you look, and this is based on, I think, the average cost of a specialty drug for a 30-day supply, right around $8,000, somewhere in there. Now, look at this really quickly. Let's say you go from 2%, or in other words, the percent of all drug claims, what percent are specialty, right? You go from 2% to 4%, the cost increases by $9 million. Run the numbers. Run the numbers. A 2% increase in the utilization of specialty drugs at an average cost of 30-day supply of $8,000 is $9 million on a $10 million starting spend. Or 14.5 in this case, 2 to 4. Generic dispensing rate. PBMs want, and when I say this, right, I don't want you to think all PBMs. Put this phrase, when I make definitive statements, put this phrase in front of, generally speaking. Generally speaking, PBMs want the generic dispensing rate to hover around 83, 84, 85%. You know why? Because they make more money that way. There's no improvement in outcomes. So think about this for a second. For every 1% increase in generic dispensing rate, in other words, the percentage of all claims being dispensed that are generic, for every 1% increase in generic dispensing rate, total costs go down by 5%. Let me say that again. For every 1% increase in GDR, total cost goes down by 5%. Don't believe me? Run the numbers. The average cost, let's say the average cost of a generic drug is, we can go high, 25 bucks. Right? Somewhere 20, 25 bucks. Assume the average cost of a brand drug per claim, the average cost is 500 bucks. Let's not even throw in specialty drugs in that calculation. Okay? The average cost of a brand drug is 500 bucks. What you are doing is replacing a $500 drug with one that costs $20. With no negative impact on outcomes. And so now, in fact, you probably have an improvement on outcomes because the members out of pocket is going to be lower. And even if they're getting these vouchers at the point of sale, and it reduces their out of pocket, it still costs the plan The plan overpays because that's waste. And so you go from 84 to 90% on a $10.5 million spend. You go from 84 to 90% GDR. You save $3 million. Run the numbers. In that report, the employer's playbook that we talked about up front, it pointed out, bullet point, a lack of focus on drug mix. This is what they're talking about. You have two PBMs. One has discount guarantees, say 2 or 3% higher than the other, right? Has rebates, specialty drug rebates, $250 higher per claim. Well, there ain't gonna be that many drugs anyway for specialty, depending on the client. So $250 isn't gonna make a big difference on how efficient the plan is run. You got all these things, but then we're not looking at this. And that same PBM that had maybe a lower discount guarantee on paper, never mind the contract, so the true discount guarantee could be higher based upon how transparent the contract is, despite the optics that some PBMs might provide to you. But then there's no consideration on this. And this is why I say the clinical is as important, and in many cases, more important than the pricing aspect of cost driver. Clinical is huge. In that same report, I'm writing an hour today. In that same report, I urge you, print that sucker off, download it, and you use it as a guide. You use it as a guide from here forward. Back with what I'm sharing with you here today. In that report, another bullet point, a lack of focus on total cost of care. They're giving it to you. They're giving it to you. A lack of focus on total cost of care, and it even goes on to say, based upon a PBM, based upon a PBM, and all those programs that we talked about, and what you will find, and this is what scares people, when the pharmacy benefit is optimized from both a pricing and a clinical standpoint, what you will find is that the rebates will be lower because you're not dispensing high cost drugs that generate the rebates. Stop chasing the rebates. Chase efficient clinical program results. Chase radical transparency in the contract. The rest will take care of itself. And so when I talk about utilization management, I talk about drug mix, what we're talking about here are these programs here. We're carving out specialty drugs, IPP, 340B, PAP program. We're carving them out. Clinical intercession. We're talking about managing the specialty drug utilization trend. We're talking about getting a 90% GDR. We're talking about PA approval rates that hover anywhere from 45 to maybe 60%. And everyone still gets the drugs they need to get better. And you can still have high net promoter scores while doing that. You just got to communicate with the members beforehand. Don't surprise them. And you have to do it multiple times. You have to repeat it and they'll understand. You got to have town hall meetings, formulary disruption letters, phone calls. and they understand. Listen, I dropped a lot on you today. We've got the only certification backed by a major university that is focused on helping employers maximize the pharmacy benefit programs that they offer to their employees from a cost and a clinical standpoint. There's CE available for pharmacists, HRCI, SHRM, as well as life and health brokers. We've got an in-person summit in Northern Michigan, beautiful this summer. We've got virtual courses. We got one this summer and another one in the fall. Someone from my team will reach out to you since you're here, or those who've registered. Just take the call. If you're not interested, just say that and we'll move on. But if you are, we'll answer your questions. That's my time today. I'm going to stick around just in case any questions come through.